He offered $1 million for a single night with her. She smiled and said there was no need to pay for something that was already his, and what they lived was written even before they were born. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end and you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave your comments saying where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. She never thought of love. In truth, Helen existed as if suspended in time, a translucent figure inhabiting the forgotten corridors of the National Archives in downtown New York City. Her work as an archivist was an excuse for self-imposed exile, a silent ritual of emotional survival. Amidst dusty boxes, censored documents, and letters that never saw the light of day, she protected herself from anything that might awaken in her something akin to desire or hope. At 26, her virginity remained intact not out of faith or moral purity, but due to a trauma so ancient it had already merged with her identity. Her body was a capsule of silence, her soul a sealed archive. Helen's life followed an almost monastic pattern. She woke at 5:30 in her small apartment in the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood, an inheritance from an aunt she had never known. She drank bitter coffee while reviewing notes from the previous day. By 7, she was on the subway, anonymous among exhausted faces. Shielded by headphones that rarely played music, they served only as a barrier against the world. She arrived at work punctually at 8, exchanged few words with colleagues, and plunged into the comfortable solitude of the historical archives, cataloguing documents from the military dictatorship, correspondence from political exiles, and records of the disappeared. The National Archives was her refuge and prison. The concrete walls of the modernist building, with its high windows that filtered a yellowish light, seemed to contain not just documents, but the very passage of time. Helen felt safe there, among papers that testified to pains greater than her own. There was something sacred in preserving memories that others wanted to forget, something redemptive in organizing the chaos of the past, something profoundly solitary in being the guardian of stories no one else wanted to tell. Her boss, Dr. Cecilia Parker, a woman in her early 60s, with grey hair always pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to have seen enough for several lifetimes, was the only person who understood, or at least respected, Helen's silence. Perhaps that was why she assigned her to the most isolated projects, to the oldest archives, to the quietest rooms. Some people need noise to find themselves. Others like you need silence, she commented once, handing Helen a new collection of documents to catalogue. These arrived yesterday. The Montgomery Family Archives. They need someone with your care. The name Montgomery made Helen freeze for an almost imperceptible instant. It was like hearing a distant bell, an ancient warning, a name that inhabited the fringes of her memory. But she merely nodded, receiving the box of documents with steady hands, as if it were nothing more than another task. It was that same afternoon that everything changed. The archive's clock read 4:37 p.m., when the private elevator, rarely used, reserved only for authorities and important donors, emitted its characteristic sound on the floor where Helen worked. The doors opened, and the world she had so carefully constructed began to crumble. Daniel Montgomery did not enter the archives. He invaded the space, as if the air around him vibrated at a different frequency. Tall, with defined features that betrayed indigenous ancestry mixed with Portuguese, he wore an impeccably tailored navy suit that contrasted with the calculated informality of his slightly disheveled dark hair. His eyes, however, were what truly captured attention, deep, dark, with an intensity that seemed to pierce any defense. Heir to the Montgomery tech empire, Daniel was the kind of figure who regularly appeared on the covers of Forbes America, at luxury charity events, and occasionally in gossip columns, always accompanied by different women, always maintaining a studied distance from everything and everyone. His reputation oscillated between cold genius and controlled decadence. Son of Frederick Montgomery, a magnate who started with a small electronics components company in the 1980s and expanded it into a billion-dollar technology conglomerate. Daniel had taken over the company after his parents' mysterious death in a helicopter accident 5 years prior. But none of this explained why he was there, in the historical archives section, walking as if he knew every corridor, every door. Helen watched his approach to Dr. Parker's desk, their brief conversation, their contained gestures, She saw when her boss pointed in her direction and felt an inexplicable shiver when Daniel Montgomery's eyes met hers. It wasn't just the surprise of being noticed, it was the recognition she saw in his gaze, as if he knew her, as if he had been looking for her. "Ms. Silva," Dr. Parker called, her voice more formal than usual. "This is Daniel Montgomery. He has come personally to check the documentation his family donated to the archives. Please show him what we have so far." Helen stood up, feeling her legs strangely fragile. "Of course," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. "Follow me, Mr. Montgomery." She led him between tall metal shelves to a reserved room where she worked with the Montgomery family documents. A long table occupied the center, covered with papers organized in chronological sequences, old photographs, newspaper clippings, and still sealed letters. "Is everything here?" he asked without preamble, his grave voice filling the small space. "Only what was delivered in the official donation," Helen replied professionally. "Documents from the Santa Clara estate, business records between 1950 and 1980, family correspondence." "I am still in the initial cataloging phase." Daniel walked slowly around the table, observing the documents without touching any. "Do you know what you're looking for?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm organizing by date and historical relevance. It's standard procedure." He smiled then, a smile that did not reach his eyes. "No, Ms. Silva. I'm asking if you know what you are looking for among these papers." He paused, studying her with a disturbing intensity. "Or should I call you Helen Bellini Silva?" The sound of her full name, a name she rarely used, made her blood run cold. No one called her Bellini. It was her mother's surname, a woman she barely knew and who had died when Helen was only 6. A surname that connected Helen to a nebulous past, to whispered stories, to a family she never wanted to claim as her own. "How do you know my full name?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I know many things, Helen, just as you must know a lot about my family." After weeks immersed in these archives, he lightly touched an old photograph where a man in a suit posed beside an elegant woman in front of a mansion. "My grandfather and grandmother, at the inauguration of the first Montgomery factory in 1953. Strange to think that it all started so modestly." Helen knew the photo. She also knew the documents that were not on the table, the ones locked in the confidential archive, records of how the modest Montgomery factory had profited by supplying equipment to military installations during the dictatorship, how it had acquired lands from political opponents imprisoned or exiled, how it had grown in the shadow of a regime that silenced by force. "Is your interest in these documents personal or corporate, Mr. Montgomery?" she asked, trying to regain professional control of the situation. "Both, and a little more." He observed her again, as if searching for something in her face. "When I saw your name on the list of employees assigned to this project, I thought it was a coincidence. Helen Bellini Silva, a Bellini working with the Montgomery archives." He took a step towards her. "But there are no coincidences like that, are there?" His proximity bothered her in a way that went beyond discomfort with strangers. It was as if he emitted a magnetic field that altered her perception. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, backing away until she felt the metal shelf against her back. "The Bellinis and the Montgomerys have a history. Helen, a history that began over 60 years ago and has not yet ended. Another step." He was too close now. "A history of broken alliances, betrayed promises and spilled blood." Something in his tone suggested intimate knowledge, not just historical facts. "I'm just an archivist doing my job," Helen said, trying to maintain her composure. "If there's any specific question about these documents, I can refer you to Dr. Parker." Daniel smiled again, this time with something close to genuine amusement. "I've already told your boss what I needed. In fact, I came here specifically to meet you." "Why?" "Because you look exactly like her." He pulled an old photograph from the inside pocket of his jacket and held it out. Helen took it with trembling fingers. The woman in the image had her face, or rather she had the woman's face. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same mouth shape, the same delicate chin. The difference was in the gaze. Where Helen had caution, the woman in the photo displayed absolute, almost arrogant confidence. She was elegantly dressed in typical 1970s fashion, dark hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, a pearl necklace contrasting with her tanned skin. "Who is she?" she asked, even though she already suspected the answer. "Sophia Bellini, your grandmother." Daniel leaned in to get a better look at the photo in her hands. "The love of my grandfather's life. And, according to some versions of the story, the woman he murdered." The words hit Helen like a physical blow. She knew her grandmother had died young, knew the whispers about tragedy and scandal, but murder? Her mother had never mentioned it in the few memories she shared before also passing away. "That's absurd," she managed to say, returning the photo as if it burned her fingers. "Is it?" Daniel put the photograph away. "Then why are you here, Helen? Why would a Bellini be cataloguing the Montgomery archives specifically? Do you really want me to believe it's a coincidence? Dr. Parker assigned me to this project. And who suggested your name to her?" Daniel moved even closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Who put you here, Helen? Who's pulling the strings?" His scent, something woody and citrusy, probably imported and absurdly expensive, invaded her senses. Helen felt the familiar sensation of claustrophobia, the same she experienced in crowded spaces, in personal conversations, in any situation that made her feel cornered. "No one is using me, Mr. Montgomery. I'm just an employee doing my job. And now, if you'll excuse me, I need to continue." She tried to pass him, but Daniel blocked her path with an outstretched arm, resting his hand on the shelf behind her, creating a barrier. "I have a proposal for you," he said, his eyes fixed on hers, the proximity so intense that Helen could feel the heat emanating from his body. $500,000 for you to leave this job and hand over anything you've found about Sophia Bellini in the Montgomery archives. "What?" Helen almost choked on the surprise. That's absurd, and probably illegal." $1 million, then?" His voice showed no urgency, only certainty. $1 million for you to disappear from this archive and give me exclusive access to everything you've discovered. It was an amount that would completely change her life, an amount that would give her freedom, security, the possibility of starting over anywhere. For an instant, Helen almost considered it. "Why?" she asked instead of answering directly. "Why is this so important to you?" Something shifted in Daniel's gaze. For a brief moment, the mask of absolute control slipped, revealing an unexpected vulnerability. "Because I'm dying, Helen." The words came out almost like a confession. "I have a degenerative neurological condition, the same one that killed my father. It started a few months ago. Slight tremors, increasingly frequent memory lapses. Doctors give me a year, maybe 2, before I start losing cognitive control. I need to know the truth before it's too late." Helen watched him, looking for signs of deceit, but saw only a raw, almost painful sincerity. "And what truth would that be?" "The truth about what happened between your grandfather, Anthony Bellini, and my grandfather, Richard Montgomery. The truth about Sophia, about the agreement that turned a small company into an empire and destroyed your family in the process." He let his arm drop, freeing her from the physical barrier, but still too close for her comfort. "You really don't know any of this, do you?" Helen hesitated. There were fragments of stories her mother had told, about lost wealth, about betrayals, about a grandfather she had never known, exiled in Portugal after problems with partners. But they were just disconnected pieces, never a complete narrative. "I only know what's in the official documents," she finally replied. Daniel took a step back, studying her with renewed interest. "Then you're as lost as I am." He adjusted his jacket with an elegant gesture. "Find the answers, Helen. In the archives, in your family, wherever. And when you find them, come to me." "Why would I do that?" "Because you have as much right to know as I do. Because our destinies are intertwined, whether we want them to be or not. And because—" He took a card from his pocket and placed it on the table. "When you discover what really happened, you'll understand that none of this is about money. It's about redemption." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door, looking back over his shoulder with an expression Helen couldn't decipher. "One last thing, Helen. Some archives mention a diary of Sophia's. If it exists, find it before others do." "What others?" "People who know much more than you or I, people who lived through that era and still guard their secrets." He hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. "People like your great-aunt, Eliza Bellini." The name hit Helen like an electric shock. Eliza is alive? The question escaped before she could contain it. An enigmatic smile appeared on Daniel's lips. Very much alive, and watching you more closely than you imagine. With that he left, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps in the silent corridor and the card on the table. Helen picked it up with trembling fingers. It was simple, elegant, with just his name and a personal cell phone number. She turned it over and found a handwritten phrase on the back. You don't need money to find what is already yours by right. That night, for the first time in years, Helen couldn't sleep. Images of Sophia Bellini mingled with Daniel Montgomery's intense face in her thoughts. Unanswered questions tormented her. Why had she never known about Eliza Bellini? Why had her mother never mentioned a murder? And, even more disturbing, why did she feel an inexplicable attraction to a man who represented everything she should hate? The next morning, she arrived at the National Archives earlier than usual. Unnoticed, she headed to the confidential documentation section, using the key Dr. Parker had entrusted to her for the Montgomery project. With a racing heart, she searched for the oldest records, those she had not yet officially catalogued. That's when she found the folder marked only Santa Clara Incident, 1975. Inside, a yellowed newspaper clipping with the headline, Fire at Santa Clara Estate Leaves 3 Dead. A photograph showed the rubble of a burned residential wing. The text briefly mentioned the victims: Sophia Bellini Montgomery, 28, wife of Richard Montgomery, and 2 unidentified employees. Authorities are investigating the causes of the fire, possibly arson. Helen sat down, feeling the floor disappear beneath her feet. Sophia was not just her grandmother. She was a Montgomery by marriage, which meant that Richard Montgomery, the supposed murderer according to Daniel, was actually her grandfather. Daniel and she shared blood. As she tried to process the revelation, something fell from the folder, a small envelope sealed with red wax, marked only with the initials EB and a date, 09/10/1975, 1 month after the fire, Eliza Bellini, an envelope that had remained sealed for almost 50 years. With trembling hands, Helen broke the seal. The contents were simple: an old key, probably to a safe or a filing cabinet, and a small handwritten note in elegant script. To whoever has the courage to open. The diary is where the fire cannot reach. It will show who truly set the flames. And why? Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. It was no longer just about history or personal curiosity. It was about a crime covered up for decades, about her own identity, about 2 families intertwined by blood, fire, and secrets. She carefully put the key and the note in her pocket. She needed to think. She needed to decide her next step. That's when her cell phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Found anything interesting, Helen? Shall we have dinner tonight to talk? Damn, how did he know? How could he possibly know she had just made a discovery? Unless someone was watching. Unless the walls of the National Archives held more secrets than just those documented in its folders. With trembling fingers, Helen replied, yes, we need to talk. She didn't know if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life or if she was finally walking towards the truth. She only knew that somehow Daniel Montgomery had become part of her story, and that the past, like a wounded animal hidden in the shadows, was beginning to awaken. The restaurant Daniel chose was located at the top of a historic building in Greenwich Village, a bohemian neighborhood that seemed to exist in a parallel version of New York City, less frantic, more nostalgic, with its colorful houses and yellow trolleys cutting through steep streets. From the terrace, the city stretched out in a carpet of lights that competed with the stars. The Statue of Liberty illuminated in the distance like a silent guardian. Helen arrived punctually at 8, dressed in a simple black dress she rarely wore, her hair loose instead of her usual ponytail. She felt strange, out of place, as if she were playing someone she wasn't. The maître led her to a secluded table, where Daniel was already waiting. He stood up when he saw her, an old-fashioned gesture of courtesy that seemed natural to him. He wore a light grey suit that contrasted with his tanned skin and highlighted the intensity of his dark eyes. For a fleeting moment, Helen allowed herself to admit that he was incredibly attractive, in a way that transcended the physical. There was something magnetic about his presence, something that demanded attention. "You came," he said, as if he had considered the possibility of her backing out. Perhaps she had. I found something you should see, Helen replied, getting straight to the point. She sat down, waving away the waiter's help with the chair. Daniel smiled, a genuine smile that momentarily transformed the seriousness of his face into something almost jovial. Not even a good evening first? No small talk before business? I'm not good at small talk. Helen kept her hands on her purse where she had stored the envelope with the key and Eliza Bellini's note. And this isn't a social engagement. Even so, I'd like it to be a real dinner. He made a discreet signal and a sommelier approached with a bottle of red wine. This is a 2011 Chilean Carmenere, an exceptional vintage, imported directly from a small family winery. Do you mind? Helen almost laughed at the incongruity of the situation. She was there to discuss potentially criminal family secrets, and he wanted to impress her with imported wine. I don't drink, she replied dryly. Daniel dismissed the sommelier with a wave. Neither do I, actually. Not anymore. It interferes with my medication. He took a sip of water. But I thought the occasion called for something special. What occasion would that be exactly? So it's our first meeting outside the archives. The beginning of a partnership that could change our lives. There was something in his confidence that both irritated and fascinated Helen. I haven't agreed to any partnership yet. But you're here. Daniel leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. And you brought something to show me. Something about Sophia, I presume. Helen hesitated, studying the man across from her. Daniel Montgomery was a walking contradiction. The arrogant billionaire from the media versus this intense, vulnerable man, obsessed with family secrets, racing against time before his mind began to fail. Which was the real one? And why did he care so much? I found an envelope, she finally said, sealed since 1975 from Eliza Bellini. She opened her purse and slid the envelope across the table, keeping the key with her. Inside was this. Daniel took the envelope with almost reverent care. He examined the broken seal, the aged paper, the initials pressed into the wax. E.B., he murmured. Eliza Bellini, Sophia's younger sister. She would be... How old now? Almost 90. You said yesterday she's alive, Helen reminded him. And watching me. Daniel unfolded the small note, reading the words written almost half a century ago. The diary is where the fire cannot reach. He looked at Helen, a renewed intensity in his eyes. So there really is a diary. Sophia really left a record. Assuming this note is authentic, Helen pondered, we need to consider the possibility that it's a trap or a dead end. Speaking like the archivist now, speaking like someone who deals with historical evidence daily. Documents can be forged. Memories can be distorted. She paused. What exactly do you expect to find in that diary if it exists? Daniel carefully placed the note back in the envelope and returned it to Helen. The truth about what happened in that fire, about why my grandfather, after Sophia's death, became a different man, cold, obsessive, transforming a promising company into an empire built on questionable methods. He took a deep breath. And perhaps, if we're lucky, the truth about my condition, your illness. Helen frowned. What would a 1970s diary have to do with your neurological condition? E. Montgomery's disease. That's what doctors call it now. Although officially it has another, more scientific name. A rare degenerative condition that affected my grandfather, my father, and now me. Always the men, always starting around 35. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, an almost imperceptible movement, but one Helen noticed, the first physical sign of the condition he had mentioned. Curiously, the first records of it in our family date from shortly after the fire that killed Sophia. A waiter approached to take their orders. Daniel, without consulting the menu, requested a grilled fish dish with herbs that was not on the menu for both of them, as if he frequented the place enough to have personalized dishes. Helen let it pass, noting that he skillfully avoided mentioning the dish's name. A small hint, perhaps of a memory lapse elegantly circumvented. When they were alone again, she resumed the conversation. Are you suggesting there's a connection between her death and your medical condition? That sounds improbable. Everything in this story is improbable, Helen. He watched her with unsettling intensity. An archivist who happens to be the granddaughter of the woman whose documents she's cataloguing. A businessman who happens to discover this archivist. A key that happens to be found 50 years after a suspicious fire. He shook his head slightly. I don't believe in coincidences on such a scale, do you? The question hung between them, provocative. Helen thought about her life up to that point, the choices she had made, the doors that had opened and closed, the path that had led her to that specific moment. She had always imagined being in control, even in her self-imposed isolation. But what if there were larger forces at play? What if she was just a piece in a game that began long before her birth? "I didn't show you everything I found," she finally confessed, taking the small brass key from her pocket. This was with the note. "But I don't know where to use it." Daniel observed the key without trying to take it. "It looks old. Probably from a bank vault or an office filing cabinet from that era." His eyes met hers. "The note says the diary is where the fire cannot reach. That suggests a place that survived the fire." The documents mention that only one wing of the Santa Clara estate was destroyed, Helen recalled. "The main residence." "The rest of the property remained intact. The estate still exists," Daniel revealed, surprising her. "It's been abandoned for decades, but it's still family property. It's a few hours from New York City in upstate New York." "You've never visited it?" A sad smile crossed his lips. "My father strictly forbade it. He said the place was haunted by memories that should remain buried." He paused as the waiter brought their dishes. "I visited once secretly as a teenager. I found only ruins and silence. I didn't have the courage to go inside." They began to eat, and Helen was surprised by her own appetite. She usually ate out of necessity, not pleasure. But there was something about the perfectly prepared fish that awakened her senses. Or perhaps it was the adrenaline of the hunt, the excitement of unearthing secrets. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked after a few moments of silence. "A trip to the Santa Clara estate. Both of us tomorrow, to find where this key fits and retrieve the diary if it exists." "Why would I agree to that? Why don't I just hand this key over to you and let you solve your family mysteries alone?" Daniel put down his cutlery, looking at her with an intensity that seemed to penetrate beyond her defenses. "Because they're not just my mysteries, Helen. They're yours too. Sophia Bellini was your grandmother. You have as much right to these answers as I do." He hesitated, as if weighing his next words. "And because you're already too involved to back out now." There was something threatening in those last words, a subtle reminder that she had removed evidence from the National Archives, an act that could cost her job. At the very least, "Are you blackmailing me, Mr. Montgomery?" "I'm being realistic. We both crossed lines we shouldn't have in the last 24 hours. The difference is, I have power and money to protect myself from the consequences." "Do you?" His brutal frankness surprised her. There was no false gentleness, no attempt to sugarcoat the pill. Just the raw truth of his privileged position versus her vulnerability. "We should be enemies," Helen murmured, more to herself than to him. "If what you say about our families is true, perhaps that's exactly why we should be allies now." Daniel leaned forward. "To break the cycle of secrets and lies that destroyed our ancestors." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Helen felt something pass between them, an electric current, a mutual recognition. There was a loneliness in Daniel that mirrored her own, though manifested in different ways. He surrounded by people but fundamentally isolated. She deliberately detached from the world but secretly yearning for connection. "We can only go on Sunday," she finally decided. "I have work tomorrow and can't just disappear without raising suspicion." His face lit up with something close to satisfaction. "Sunday, then. I'll pick you up at 6 in the morning. I can meet you there. You don't know the way, and I doubt you have a car that can handle the dirt roads to the estate." His tone was not arrogant but practical. "Besides, if we're going to do this, we do it together." "From the start." Helen nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the logic of the argument. "All right." Sunday, 6 in the morning. The rest of the dinner passed in a strange silence, not exactly uncomfortable but laden with anticipation. When they finished, Daniel insisted on accompanying her to a taxi, despite her protests that she could take care of herself. "I don't doubt that for a second," he replied with a half-smile. "But there are certain courtesies that stand the test of time, even between potential enemies." On the sidewalk as they waited for the taxi, Daniel seemed momentarily vulnerable under the soft light of Greenwich Village's old street lamps. "Helen," he began, his tone more personal, "there's something I need to ask you. Something that might sound strange." She raised her eyebrows, waiting. "Have you ever had dreams about a house you've never visited? About a woman you've never met singing a song in Italian? The question caught her completely off guard. Since childhood, Helen had occasionally dreamed of a large house with high windows, and a woman with her back to the piano, singing a lullaby in Italian that she couldn't fully understand, but whose melody haunted her upon waking. "How could you know that?" she whispered, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the night breeze. "Because I've had the same dream since childhood." His eyes reflected the city lights. The same house, the same song, La Farfalla Blu, the blue butterfly. A lullaby my grandmother wrote according to my father, a song only Sophia knew. A taxi approached, saving Helen from answering. Daniel opened the door for her, but before she got in, he lightly held her wrist. The contact sent a wave of warmth through her arm, a sensation so unexpected that she almost recoiled. "Sunday, Helen. Don't disappear until then." There was genuine concern in his voice and something more, fear perhaps. Fear that she would flee with the secrets they were beginning to uncover, or fear of facing the ghosts of the Santa Clara estate alone. "I'll be waiting," she promised, quickly getting into the taxi to escape the intensity of that moment. During the ride back home, Helen kept her eyes fixed on the city lights, trying to sort her thoughts. Part of her wanted to retreat, return the key to the archives, pretend she had never found Eliza Bellini's envelope, to go back to the safety of her meticulous routine, of her voluntary isolation. But another part, a part she no longer recognized, yearned for the answers, yearned for Sunday, yearned, though she didn't want to admit it, to see Daniel again. When she arrived at her small apartment, she found an envelope slipped under the door. Her name was handwritten, in an elegant, old-fashioned script she had never seen before. Inside, a single sheet of paper, yellowed with time, with few words. "Not all fires consume, some preserve. Beware of the Montgomerys. They destroy what they love. E.B." Helen sank onto the sofa, her heart pounding in her chest. Eliza Bellini, alive, and watching her closely enough to know her address. That night, the dream came more vividly than ever. The large house, the high windows, the piano in the corner of the room. But this time the woman singing slowly turned around, and she had her own face. Sunday dawned with a fine rain that enveloped New York City in a silvery mist, softening contours, diluting colors. Helen waited on the sidewalk in front of her, building, protected by a plain umbrella, a backpack with essential items at her feet. She wore jeans, a t-shirt, and a light jacket, the closest she had to appropriate clothing for a visit to an abandoned estate. Punctually at 6, a black Land Rover parked by the curb, the driver's window lowered, revealing Daniel at the wheel. There was no chauffeur, no security, or any apparatus Helen would expect from a billionaire. Just him alone, in casual clothes that somehow still looked elegant. "Good morning," he greeted, opening the passenger door from the inside. "Ready?" "For a treasure hunt." The forced lightness in his tone did not match the evident tension on his face. Helen noticed small lines of fatigue around his eyes, as if he hadn't slept well. "As ready as I can be," she replied, getting into the vehicle and placing her backpack at her feet. "How long until we get there?" 3 hours, with luck. More if the rain worsens. Daniel maneuvered the car back into the still quiet Sunday morning traffic. "I brought coffee and cheese bread. They're in the glove compartment." The gesture surprised her. It seemed strangely domestic, almost intimate for a man like him. "Thank you." She poured herself steaming coffee from a sleek thermos. It was strong and perfectly prepared. "You tracked me, didn't you?" The direct question made him glance quickly at her, before returning his attention to the road. "Excuse me." "My address. How did you know where to pick me up?" "You sent it to me in a message last night, don't you remember?" Helen frowned. "I didn't send you my address." A strange silence filled the car. Daniel adjusted the rearview mirror, a gesture that seemed more like an excuse not to face her. "Interesting. I received a message from your number with the address and confirmation of the time." He took his phone from his pocket and handed it to her. "See for yourself." Helen checked the conversation. Indeed, there was a message sent at 11:17 p.m. the previous night, from her own number, with her full address and the phrase confirmed for tomorrow, 6 a.m. I'll be waiting. I didn't send that, she stated, feeling a shiver run down her spine. My phone was with me the whole time. Daniel took back the phone, his face now grim. Then it seems we're not the only ones interested in this story. He drove in silence for a few moments before adding, I received something else last night. An anonymous email with a single photo attached. What photo? Sophia and my grandfather on the porch of the Santa Clara estate. Dated 1975, a week before the fire. In the background of the photo, watching them from a distance, was a woman. The email simply said, Eliza never forgot, never forgave. Why do you think you're sick? Helen felt the coffee in her stomach churn. Someone is playing with us, trying to manipulate us, or warning us. Daniel slightly increased his speed as the car entered the highway. You received something too, didn't you? I can see it in your eyes. She hesitated, considering lying, but what would be the point now? An envelope under my door. A note from E.B. Eliza Bellini, warning me to be careful of your family. And yet you're here in a car with me going to an isolated estate. There was no accusation in his voice, just genuine curiosity. Why Helen? It was a question she had been asking herself since she woke up. Why risk herself like this? Why trust this man she barely knew, who represented a family possibly responsible for her own family's destruction? Because I need to know, she finally replied. I've spent my whole life feeling like there was an empty space inside me. A puzzle with missing pieces. My mother died too soon to explain our past to me, and I always felt there was something more, something hidden. She looked out the window, watching the city gradually give way to the mountains and valleys of upstate New York. Perhaps it's foolish, but I feel like Sophia called me to this, through the archives, through the dream we apparently share. Daniel drove in silence for several miles before replying. I don't think it's foolish. I think some stories demand to be told, no matter how long it takes. And some connections, he hesitated as if carefully choosing his words, some connections transcend rational explanations. The rain intensified as they drove down the highway, the sky darkening despite the advancing morning. They spoke, little during the trip, each lost in their own thoughts, occasionally exchanging observations about the landscape or practical details of the journey. There was a strange familiarity in that shared silence, as if they had traveled together many times before. After about 2.5 hours, Daniel left the main highway, following increasingly narrower secondary roads. Eventually, they turned onto a dirt road, the Land Rover rattling over potholes and bumps, mud splashing on the windows. Almost there, he announced, slowing down as they approached a wrought iron gate partially swallowed by vegetation. The gate was ajar, as if someone had recently passed through. Looks like we're not the first visitors, Helen observed, feeling a knot of apprehension form in her stomach. Daniel stopped the car before the gate, studying it with a tense expression. This gate should be locked. No one has been here for years, except perhaps the caretaker the company keeps to check on the property occasionally. Maybe it was him? A Sunday in this rain. He shook his head, incredulous. And why would he leave the gate open? A heavy silence fell between them. The rain drummed on the car roof, creating an anxious rhythm that seemed to reflect the acceleration of their hearts. We can go back, Daniel suggested, surprising her. We don't have to do this today, not if it's not safe. The genuine concern in his voice touched her. We didn't come all this way to give up because of an open gate, she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Besides, if someone really wants to manipulate us in this story, I doubt a postponement will change anything. Daniel watched her for a moment, as if assessing her determination. Then, with a brief nod, he started the car again. Stay alert. If anything seems wrong, we leave immediately. They drove through the gate, following a long avenue lined with ancient trees that formed a dark green tunnel. After about a mile, the vegetation opened up, revealing a wide clearing, and in its center the Santa Clara estate. Helen felt her heart skip a beat. It was the house from her dream. Exactly as she imagined, an elegant colonial-style building with a wide porch, high windows, and a central staircase leading to the main entrance. Part of it, the left wing, was clearly damaged by the fire decades ago with blackened walls and a partially destroyed roof. But the rest of the house remained structurally intact, though clearly abandoned, with broken windows and vines invading the walls. "It's exactly like in the dream," she murmured, almost unaware she was speaking aloud. "Yes," Daniel agreed, his voice equally low. "It's as if you've been here before." He parked the car a few feet from the house, turning off the engine. The sudden silence, broken only by the drumming rain, seemed to amplify the imposing presence of the estate. "The key," Helen reminded him, taking it from her jacket pocket. "The note said the diary is where the fire cannot reach." "The right side of the house," Daniel deduced, pointing to the intact wing. "That's probably where the family offices and library were." They got out of the car, running through the rain to the partial shelter of the porch. The floorboards creaked under their feet, some rotted by time and moisture. The main door was locked, but one of the side windows had broken glass, allowing Daniel to reach the internal lock and open it. "After you," he said, making a chivalrous gesture that would seem affected in any other circumstance, but which seemed natural to him. Helen entered, immediately feeling the heavy air of dampness and abandonment. The interior of the house was in a state of elegant deterioration. Old furniture covered with dusty sheets, peeling wallpaper, cobwebs decorating corners and chandeliers. The grey light of the rainy day filtered through the dirty windows, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere. "The office would be this way," Daniel indicated, following a corridor to the right. "According to the house plans I studied last night." "You prepared," Helen observed, following him. "I have little time to waste," he replied simply, a subtle reminder of his condition. The office was a large room with built-in bookshelves covering 2 entire walls, most of the books still in their places, protected by glass doors. A large dark wooden desk dominated the center of the room, and behind it, an oil portrait of a man with a severe expression. Richard Montgomery, Helen presumed. Daniel walked directly to the portrait, examining it carefully. "My grandfather," he confirmed, "painted at the height of his power, a few years after Sophia's death." Helen approached, studying the face in the portrait. There was something in the man's eyes, a hardness, a calculated coldness that vaguely resembled Daniel's eyes when she first met him, but without the vulnerability she later discovered in him. "He doesn't look like a man of remorse," she commented. "No," Daniel agreed. "He looks like a man who buried any feeling so deeply that he forgot where he put it." He touched the frame of the painting, thoughtful. "A legacy he passed on to my father, and that my father tried to pass on to me." There was a bitterness in his voice that Helen hadn't expected. "You're different from them." "Am I?" He smiled sadly. "I commanded Montgomery Tech, using many of the same ruthless methods. I turned millions into billions. I stepped on whoever I needed to step on. But you're here now, seeking truths, not burying them." She didn't know why she felt the need to defend this aspect of him, to highlight this difference. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, as if searching for something in her face. Then, with an almost inaudible sigh, he turned his attention back to the room. "We need to find where this key fits." Her safe, a locked drawer. They began to methodically examine the office. Helen focused on the bookshelves and drawers, while Daniel inspected panels and floorboards, looking for secret compartments. The rain intensified outside, beating against the windows with increasing force, creating an unsettling soundtrack for their search. "Here," Helen called after a few minutes, pointing to a small built-in cabinet under one of the bookshelves. The lock was old, dark and brass. "Looks about the right size." Daniel approached, examining the lock. "Worth a try." With slightly trembling fingers, from anxiety or a symptom of his condition Helen couldn't tell, she inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a satisfying click, the mechanism turned. Inside the cabinet, a single dark wooden box without adornments or inscriptions. Helen carefully removed it, placing it on the desk. The box was not locked, just closed. "Together," Daniel suggested, his voice almost a whisper. Helen nodded, and both opened the lid simultaneously. The contents were surprisingly simple: a diary bound in faded red leather, some old photographs, a sealed envelope, and a small jewelry box. Daniel reached for the diary first, opening it with reverence. "It's hers," he confirmed. showing the first page where, in elegant handwriting, it read, Diary of Sophia Bellini Montgomery, 1973 to 1975. Helen picked up the photographs, examining them one by one. They showed Sophia at various moments, alone on the estate porch with Richard at social events, with a small child who must have been Daniel's father. In all of them, even the most formal, there was a vibrancy in her eyes, a joy that seemed to overflow the limits of the paper. She was exactly like you, Daniel murmured, looking over Helen's shoulder. Not just physically. There's something in the gaze. Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. In one of the photos, Sophia wore an elegant dress at a gala, with a pearl necklace identical to the one Helen had seen in her dreams. The resemblance was in fact disturbing. Here, Daniel said, who had begun to leaf through the diary, the last entries shortly before the fire. Together, they read the words written almost half a century ago, August 10th, 1975. IR found out. I don't know how, but he found out. About E, about us, about everything. His look at dinner today. I've never seen so much hatred in someone's eyes. He said nothing, but I know he knows. I'm afraid of what he might do. Not for me, I've accepted my fate, but for E and what she carries. R would never allow anything to threaten his legacy, his pure lineage. I need to act fast. The plan is in motion, but I fear we won't have enough time. August 12th, 1975. E left last night, taking with her what we need to protect at all costs. The agreement is made with me. He assured me the substance will work as planned. It's not revenge, I tell myself, it's justice. R has destroyed so many lives with his greed, his unrestrained ambition, the people who disappeared during the construction of the South Factory, the agreements with the military, the lands taken from families opposed to the regime. The list of sins is too long. If what I plan works, justice will be poetic. The empire he built will be his prison. His blood, his curse, until the truth is revealed and the cycle broken. August 14th, 1975. This will be my last entry. It is done. The substance has been in his system for 3 days. M assured me that the symptoms will begin soon. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible, slight tremors, small memory lapses, progressing slowly through generations, a chemical curse, a molecular revenge. Forgive me, little Frederick, for condemning you and those to come as well. But your father left me no choice. Tonight I will burn all evidence, except this diary, which I will hide where the fire cannot reach. If you are reading this, it is because the time for truth has come. The cure is with E, it always has been. Look for her where the blue butterflies fly for the last time. Helen looked up, meeting Daniel's stunned gaze. She poisoned your grandfather with some substance that causes the same symptoms as your disease. Her voice was a horrified whisper. It's not genetic. It's a chemical curse, as she describes it. Daniel seemed to have aged years in a few minutes. A revenge that spans generations, he murmured, his voice trembling slightly. For something my grandfather did. Something related to E, Eliza Bellini, I presume. And what she carried, Helen added. What could be so important that Richard Montgomery couldn't tolerate? As if in response to her question, the small jewelry box on the desk emitted an almost inaudible click. Both turned their attention to it. Helen opened it carefully. Inside, a delicate miniature music box. When the lid was fully opened, a mechanism activated and a soft melody filled the room, the same melody from their shared dreams. La farfalla blu, the blue butterfly. My God, Daniel whispered, his face pale. It's the song. As the music played, the bottom of the box slid sideways, revealing a secret compartment. In it, a small amber glass vial sealed with red wax and a folded note. Helen took the note with trembling fingers, unfolding it carefully. To whoever finds this diary, the vial contains the proof, a sample of the substance administered to Richard Montgomery. Developed by Dr. Maurice Costa, E.M., a brilliant chemist and survivor of the political persecution Richard helped orchestrate. The cure, as I mentioned, is with Eliza, but the cure is not just chemical, it is truth. The antidote will only work when the last Montgomery recognizes the crimes of his ancestor and makes peace with the past. Look for Eliza where the blue butterflies fly for the last time. At the Blue Butterfly Sanctuary in Beacon, a place she helped create with money Richard never knew she possessed. Daniel took the vial with reverent care, examining it against the grey light coming through the window. An amber liquid, still perfectly preserved after decades. A genetically transmitted poison, he murmured, his voice choked with contained emotion. Something that integrated into the Montgomery DNA, passing from generation to generation. And a cure that depends not only on a physical antidote, but on redemption? It's almost mystical, Helen observed, equally shaken, like a fairy tale curse, broken only when the prince recognizes his sins. A sudden thunderclap shook the house, making them jump. The storm had worsened significantly while they were absorbed in their discovery. We need to go to Beacon, Daniel decided, carefully putting the vial back in the box. Find Eliza if she's still alive. Discover the rest of the story. Helen nodded, beginning to gather the items to take with them. That's when she noticed the sealed envelope they hadn't opened yet. Wait, there's still this. She broke the seal, finding inside a last letter, written in the same elegant handwriting as the diary. My dearest Helen, yes, I know your name, though we have never met. I know it is you who will find this diary, for dreams do not lie. Sophia told me about your visions. She knew her granddaughter would one day return to unearth the truth. You are not just like her. You are her continuation, her living legacy, and the man who will be with you, for I know you will not come alone, is more than he seems. Daniel is not just a Montgomery. He is also a Bellini. Sophia was 7 months pregnant when she died in the fire. Not by Richard, but by Maurice Costa, the chemist who created the poison and who loved Sophia since his youth. The boy, Frederick, Daniel's father, survived by a miracle, pulled from the burning house by a maid, and handed to Richard, who never knew the truth about his paternity. Thus, the last Montgomery is in fact also a Bellini. And you, Helen, are not just Sophia's granddaughter. You are Eliza's great niece. We are family. Come find me where the blue butterflies fly for the last time. I have waited too long for this moment. The circle now closes. With love, Eliza Bellini. A stunned silence fell upon them. Helen looked at Daniel, seeing her own shock reflected in his eyes. You are, she began, unable to complete the sentence. Part Bellini, he finished, his voice almost inaudible. And you and I are family, Helen completed. In some distant way, but family. Daniel slumped into the chair behind the desk, the weight of the revelations clearly affecting him. My whole life, the whole history of the company. My illness, all based on lies and secrets. Helen approached him hesitantly, placing a hand on his shoulder. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched him, and she felt a strange current of energy in the contact. Not just lies and secrets, she said softly. Also love. Sophia loved Maurice. Eliza loved Sophia enough to protect her legacy. And now we have a chance to break the curse, Daniel completed, covering her hand with his. Find Eliza, get the antidote, fix what was broken. Another thunderclap shook the house, this time accompanied by a more disturbing sound, that of wood giving way. Part of the ceiling in the adjacent corridor collapsed with a deafening crash. We have to get out of here, Daniel urged, getting up quickly. The structure won't hold up in this storm. Helen nodded, helping him quickly put the diary, letters, and box into her backpack. They ran for the exit, dodging debris and puddles formed by the water now freely entering through the damaged ceiling. When they reached the porch, the rain had turned into a deluge. They ran to the car, getting soaked in the process. Daniel struggled with the keys, his hands now visibly trembling, a symptom that seemed to worsen with stress. Let me, Helen offered, gently taking the keys. I'll drive. He didn't protest, moving to the passenger seat. As Helen started the engine and maneuvered to leave, he kept his gaze fixed on the estate, as if bidding farewell to a past he had never truly known. To Beacon, then? She asked when they reached the gate again. To Beacon, Daniel confirmed. To Eliza, to the truth. He turned to face her, his dark eyes reflecting a mix of pain and hope, and perhaps, if we're lucky, to a new beginning. As the car drove down the dirt road, now turned to mud, the rain slowly began to subside. For a fleeting moment, a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the drenched landscape with an almost supernatural golden light. And in the sky above them, a single blue butterfly flew against the wind, guiding the way to Beacon. The road to Beacon wound through the Catskill Mountains. Emerging from the storm clouds, into a sky that gradually opened into patches of blue. Helen drove focused, stealing occasional glances at Daniel, who was leafing through Sophia's diary with an absorbed expression. The discovery at the Santa Clara estate had fundamentally altered the ground between them. They were no longer just two strangers united by a shared mystery, but people whose family histories were intertwined by blood, secrets, and possibly destiny. "How do you feel?" Helen finally asked, breaking the silence that had stretched for miles. Daniel closed the diary, running a hand through his rain-damp hair, like someone who just discovered that his entire life was built on a lie. He looked out the window, at the mist-shrouded mountains, and at the same time strangely relieved, as if a part of me always knew there was more to the story. "The Bellini part of you, perhaps," Helen suggested, attempting a slight smile. A flash of humor crossed his face. "Perhaps, although I don't know exactly what it means to be a Bellini." "We're stubborn," Helen offered. "At least that's what my mother always said." The mention of her mother brought a new perspective. "Your mother must have known Eliza," Daniel reflected. "If Eliza is alive and involved in all this," Helen nodded slowly. "Probably, but my mother never talked about her, not directly, just insinuations, vague stories about a great aunt who lived far away. I always thought she was dead. And now we're going to meet her." Daniel checked the GPS on his phone. "The Blue Butterfly Sanctuary is about 20 minutes from here, in the mountains above Beacon. It's a private environmental reserve, apparently." Helen felt a chill run down her spine. Funded with money Richard never knew she possessed. I wonder what that story is. Another piece of the puzzle. Daniel carefully folded Eliza's letter, putting it back in the backpack along with the diary. And perhaps the last one we need to complete the picture. As they ascended the mountains, the landscape became more lush and wild. Occasional signs indicated the way to the sanctuary, a narrow road that diverged from the main route, penetrating deeper into the preserved Atlantic forest. A modest gate marked the entrance, with a simple wooden sign, "Blue Butterfly Sanctuary, Private Ecological Reserve." There were no guards or entry control, just a small cabin that seemed to function as a visitor center, currently closed because it was Sunday. "It looks deserted," Helen observed, parking the car in the small, empty parking lot. "Not entirely," Daniel corrected, pointing to a well-maintained trail that led from the cabin. An elderly figure, a woman, waited at the beginning of the path, erect and still as a sentinel. Helen felt her heart race. Even from a distance, there was something familiar about that figure, something that resonated with memories she didn't know she possessed. "Eliza," she murmured, more of a realization than a question. They got out of the car in silence, walking side by side to the woman who awaited them. As they approached, the details became clearer. An elderly lady, but with impeccable posture, dressed simply in dark pants and a white linen blouse. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and her face, marked by time, maintained a classic beauty that echoed the photographs of Sophia they had seen. More impressive, however, were her eyes, lively, penetrating, a golden brown that seemed to absorb and reflect the afternoon sunlight. The same eyes as Helen's. "You took your time," the woman said when they stopped before her, her voice surprisingly strong and clear for someone her age. "I thought you would arrive earlier," considering the urgency of the situation. There was no accusation in her tone, just an objective observation, as if she were commenting on the weather. "There were complications at the estate," Daniel replied, recovering first from the surprise. The storm was necessary," Eliza interrupted with a slight wave of her hand. "It clears the air, renews." Her eyes fixed on Helen, studying her with an almost physical intensity. "You are even more like her than in the photographs." Helen felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Recognition, belonging, a connection that transcended the time and circumstances of their meeting. "Eliza Bellini," she managed to say, her voice firmer than she expected. The woman nodded slightly. "And you are Helen Bellini Silva, and this one is," she turned her penetrating gaze to Daniel, "is the last of the Montgomerys. Or so he thinks." Daniel met her gaze without flinching. "We know the truth. Or part of it. We read Sophia's diary." Something akin to satisfaction crossed Eliza's face. "Then you know about the poison, about Sophia's revenge. About your true father, Maurice Costa," Daniel confirmed. "The chemist who created the substance." "Yes, Maurice. A shadow of ancient emotion passed over Eliza's face. A brilliant man, kind, destroyed by the regime that Richard Montgomery helped to finance and protect. Imprisoned, tortured, almost killed, until Sophia found him and hid him. And they fell in love. Helen completed. Sophia always had a soft spot for lost causes, Eliza said, a sad smile playing on her lips. And Maurice was the most lost cause of all. A Jewish communist scientist persecuted by the dictatorship. She made a sweeping gesture to the trail behind her. Let's go. The story is long and it's better told walking. The air here helps clear the mind. Eliza turned and started down the trail without waiting for confirmation. Her stride was firm and confident, belying her advanced age. Helen and Daniel exchanged a brief look before following her. The path led deeper into the forest, gradually ascending. As they walked, Helen noticed small educational plaques about the native vegetation and, more significantly, about the butterflies that gave the sanctuary its name. The blue morpho, Eliza explained, noticing her interest, one of the most beautiful species of the Atlantic forest. Wings of an intense metallic blue, visible for miles when the sun illuminates them. Sophia loved them. She said they were free, transformed souls. She looked over her shoulder at Daniel. Oh, your tremor is worsening. It wasn't a question. Helen looked at Daniel, noticing that he kept his right hand firmly in his pocket, trying to hide the tremors that had intensified in the last few hours. Symptoms accelerate under stress, he confirmed. Doctors say I have perhaps a year before it affects more serious cognitive functions. Doctors don't understand what they're treating, Eliza replied dryly. It's not a conventional disease. It's a substance specifically designed to alter the Montgomery DNA, gradually activating through generations. Why? The question escaped Helen before she could contain it. Why would Sophia do something like that? Condemn entire generations for something Richard did? Eliza stopped abruptly, turning to face them. The afternoon sun filtered through the treetops, creating a pattern of light and shadow on her face. You didn't read everything in the diary, she stated. Sophia wrote about the fire, about the plan, about the poison, but she didn't write about what Richard did to deserve such revenge. She resumed walking, now at a slower pace. Richard Montgomery was not just an opportunistic businessman collaborating with the dictatorship. He was a methodically cruel monster. When he learned that Sophia was having an affair with Maurice, he didn't confront, didn't threaten, he planned. Her voice hardened. He used his contacts in the regime to kidnap Maurice's only daughter from a previous marriage, an 8-year-old girl named Anna. Helen felt her stomach churn with the revelation. Beside her, Daniel visibly paled. He killed the child, he asked, his voice almost inaudible. Worse. Eliza briefly closed her eyes, as if the memory was too physical to bear. He kept her prisoner in the Santa Clara estate itself, in the basement of the East Wing, the wing that later burned. He sent a lock of her hair to Maurice as proof with a message. Stay away from Sophia, or the next part of the girl will be larger. They reached a small clearing, where rustic benches formed a semicircle around a lush garden designed specifically to attract butterflies. Eliza sat on one of the benches, inviting them to do the same with a gesture. Maurice despaired. He wanted to surrender in exchange for his daughter, but Sophia stopped him. She had another plan. Eliza looked directly at Daniel. Sophia intended to free Anna, flee with her and Maurice using money she had hidden from Richard for years. Her Bellini inheritance that he believed had all been invested in the company. But something went wrong, Helen deduced. Everything went wrong. Eliza's voice trembled for the first time. On the night planned for the escape, Richard returned early from a trip. He found Sophia in the basement, trying to free Anna. There was a struggle. He pushed Sophia against a wall. She hit her head. Anna screamed, tried to run. Richard, in a panic, locked them in the basement and set fire to the house. Daniel covered his face with his hands. My God! The fire spread quickly. The servants tried to help, but Richard stopped them, saying it was just a controlled fire to clear debris. When he finally allowed them to intervene, it was too late. Eliza took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to continue. Sophia was 7 months pregnant. The baby, Frederick, your father, survived by a miracle. One of the maids, Maria, managed to remove him from Sophia's womb before the flames completely consumed them. And Richard took the child as his own, Daniel completed, his voice choked. Yes, he never knew he wasn't his biological son. He believed Sophia had died trying to save some sentimental item during the accidental fire, a tragic end for a beloved wife. The contempt in Eliza's voice was palpable. But the poison? Helen began, confused. If Sophia died that night, how could she have poisoned Richard? Because I did it for her, Eliza replied simply. Maurice and I. We had the plan, we had the formula he had developed, an undetectable substance that would bind to Richard's DNA, subtly altering it, creating a degenerative condition that would gradually manifest and be transmitted to his descendants, to the men of the lineage specifically. A transgenerational revenge, Daniel murmured. Poetic justice, Eliza corrected. The empire Richard built with blood would last only until the truth came out. 3 generations, we calculated, the time needed for the circle to close. Helen felt a shiver run down her spine. And the antidote? Do you have it? Eliza smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. The antidote always existed. Maurice created it simultaneously with the poison, insisting there should be a way out, a possibility of redemption. She studied Daniel for a long moment. But it only works under 2 conditions. It must be administered by someone with Bellini blood, a direct descendant of Sophia or me. And the last Montgomery must publicly acknowledge the crimes of his ancestor, undoing the mantle of respectability that covered the Montgomery name for decades. A heavy silence fell upon them. In the distance, the sound of the forest, birds, insects, the gentle rustling of leaves, created a peaceful soundtrack that contrasted with the intensity of the moment. If I do that, Daniel finally said, if I publicly acknowledge what my grandfather did, expose the crimes of Montgomery Tech during the dictatorship, the company I built will crumble. Thousands will lose their jobs. My reputation will be destroyed. Yes, Eliza agreed without hesitation. The empire will fall, as it was destined to fall from the beginning. The question is, what is worth more to you, Daniel? The Montgomery, legacy or your own life, the empire or the truth? Helen watched Daniel, seeing the inner conflict reflected on his face. This man she had met only a few days ago, who had entered her life like a storm, destabilizing everything she thought she knew about herself and her past. This man who, against all odds, was beginning to mean something to her that she dared not yet name. There's another option, she said softly, surprising herself. It doesn't have to be complete destruction. It can be transformation. Both turned to her, curious. Montgomery Tech has immense resources, global influence. What if, instead of destroying it, you redirected it? Acknowledged the crimes of the past, compensated the victims, created foundations to support causes Sophia and Maurice would champion, transformed the legacy of blood into one of redemption. Daniel looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. You believe that's possible? That something built on such a rotten foundation can be saved? I believe in second chances, she replied simply. In new beginnings. A slight smile appeared on Eliza's lips. Sophia would say the same. She stood up, walking to a small flowering bush at the edge of the garden. Gently, she plucked a single blue flower. This is the antidote, extracted from this plant. Maurice cultivated it. We call it Sophia's tear. It grows only here in this specific microclimate. She turned to Daniel. Make your choice, son of Maurice, but know that it must be genuine. The antidote is like the truth. It doesn't work halfway. Daniel stood up, walking a few steps to the edge of the clearing. The late afternoon light created a golden halo around him, highlighting him against the deep green of the forest. For a long moment, he remained still, his back to them, as if fighting an internal battle. When he turned, there was a new determination in his gaze. I need paper and a pen, he said simply. Eliza nodded as if she expected exactly that. From a small bag she carried, she took out a notebook and a pen, handing them to him. Helen watched as Daniel wrote quickly, filling page after page with his firm but increasingly trembling hand. When he finished, he handed the notebook to Helen. "A full confession," he explained. "Everything I discovered about Richard Montgomery, about the company's collaboration with the dictatorship, about the murder of Sophia and Anna, and my intention to transform Montgomery Tech into something that honors the legacy of Maurice Costa and Sophia Bellini. Not Richard." He took a deep breath. "My press secretary will receive this tomorrow along with instructions to distribute it to all major media outlets." Eliza studied him for a long moment, as if assessing the sincerity of his intention. Then, with a small nod, she took a blue glass vial from her bag. "Take this now, a full dose, and you'll need 3 more doses, 1 per week, administered by someone with Bellini blood." She looked significantly at Helen. "The symptoms will gradually recede. In a month, there will be no more tremors. In 3, tests will show no more DNA anomalies." Daniel took the vial, looking at it with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "It seems almost magical." "Science often seems magical to the uninitiated," Eliza replied dryly. "Maurice was a misunderstood genius. In another era, he would have won Nobels. In ours, he was persecuted and almost destroyed." Helen watched as Daniel opened the vial and drank its contents without hesitation. Something in the complete trust of that gesture deeply moved her. "Do you have the other 3 doses?" she asked Eliza. The elderly woman took 3 more identical vials from her bag, handing them to Helen. "1 per week. Do not fail. And," her gaze softened slightly, "come see me between doses. We have much to talk about, you and I. Family stories that deserve to be shared." Helen nodded, feeling unexpected tears sting her eyes. "Thank you for waiting for us, for preserving the truth." "The truth always finds a way," Eliza replied simply, "even if it takes 50 years." They began the walk back in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning to set, tinging the sky orange and pink, creating elongated shadows on the trail. When they reached the parking lot, Eliza stopped. "I won't go any further today. This is where I live now." She looked at the surrounding forest with evident affection. "Where the blue butterflies fly. For the last time." "We'll be back," Helen promised. "I know you will." Eliza briefly touched Helen's face with surprisingly soft fingers. "You have her eyes, you know. Not just the physical appearance, the inner gaze, the ability to see beyond the obvious." Then, to both their surprise, she extended her hand to Daniel as well, gently touching his cheek. "And you have his stubbornness, the same stubborn determination as Maurice. Use it well." With that, she turned and walked back into the trail, her erect figure gradually disappearing among the trees. Helen and Daniel stood side by side in the parking lot, watching her leave until she was no longer visible. The silence between them was no longer laden with distrust or caution, but with something new, a mutual understanding, a newfound respect, and something more that neither was ready to name. "What happens now?" Helen finally asked. Daniel turned to her, his eyes reflecting the evening sky. "Now comes the hard part. Tomorrow, the world will know the truth about the Montgomerys, about Richard, about me. About us," Helen corrected softly. A small smile appeared on his lips. "About us," he agreed. "A Montgomery who is a Bellini who saved a Montgomery." Poetic, isn't it? Helen smiled back, surprising herself with the ease of the gesture. "I have a confession," Daniel said, suddenly serious. "When I first saw you at the archives, it wasn't a coincidence. I had been looking for you for months." Helen frowned. "How?" "I started having the dreams more frequently when the first symptoms appeared. The house, the music, Sophia. I hired researchers to investigate Bellini descendants. Your name came up when I learned you worked at the National Archives, precisely in the section where Montgomery documents were being catalogued." He made a vague gesture. "It seemed like destiny." "So you manipulated me from the start," Helen concluded, a sting of disappointment coloring her voice. "No," Daniel took a step towards her. "I planned a meeting, yes, but everything that happened afterward, your help, your ideas, your emotions, that could never be manipulated." He was close now, close enough for Helen to feel the warmth emanating from him, to see the gold in his brown eyes that fixed on hers with an almost palpable intensity. "I don't know what I feel for you," she admitted, her honesty surprising both of them. "Everything happened so fast, so intensely." "Perhaps that's what happens when two people are connected by something greater than themselves," he replied softly. "When the past and present collide, creating possibilities." The word hung between them, laden with unspoken promises. "I need the next 3 doses of the antidote," Daniel reminded her, his tone slightly provocative. "Administered by someone with Bellini blood. It seems we're stuck with each other for at least 3 more weeks." Helen couldn't help a small smile. "I suppose so." "And after that?" His question contained vulnerability rarely shown. Helen took a deep breath, looking at the sky that was gradually darkening. At the first stars appearing on the horizon, she thought of the entire journey that had brought them there. The dusty archives, the mysterious key, the revealing diary, the painful truth. She thought of Sophia and Maurice, of love and revenge, of buried secrets and resurfaced truths. And then she looked at the man in front of her, no longer the arrogant billionaire she had met days ago, but someone who had chosen truth over power, who risked everything for redemption. Someone who, in some improbable way, was beginning to feel like home. "After that," she finally said, "we write our own story. No curses, no secrets." Daniel extended his hand, hesitantly touching her face, a touch so soft it seemed almost imaginary. "I'd like that." The first kiss came naturally, without premeditation or hesitation, just two beings inevitably gravitating towards each other, as if the entire universe conspired for that specific moment. It was gentle and deep at the same time, laden with promises not yet articulated but already felt. When they separated, Helen saw in Daniel's face the same astonishment that she knew was etched on hers, the astonishment of finding, against all odds, an unexpected belonging. "I think Sophia and Maurice would approve," he murmured against her lips. "And Eliza definitely planned this," Helen replied with a small laugh. Above them, a single blue butterfly flew in circles, its wings catching the last rays of the setting sun, shining like a living sapphire against the velvety sky. A symbol of transformation, of beauty emerging from darkness, of new beginnings after painful endings. As they walked back to the car, hands intertwined as if it were the most natural gesture in the world, Helen thought about the cyclical nature of life, about how stories that seem finished can, in fact, be just the prologue to new narratives. The drive back to New York City was quiet, filled with soft conversations about immediate future plans, the press conference Daniel would convene, the archives documents Helen would need to organize to corroborate the story, the inevitable media storms they would face. When they arrived at Helen's apartment in Brooklyn Heights, it was already past midnight. Daniel parked, turned off the engine, but made no mention of leaving. "Want to come in?" Helen offered, surprising herself with the naturalness of the invitation. "Only if it's to stay," he replied, the simplicity of the answer hiding its depth. Helen smiled, recognizing the inevitable truth between them. "I guess that's what new beginnings are for, aren't they? To stay." That night, as the city slept, around them, two heirs to a story of love and revenge began to write a new chapter. A chapter of healing, of shared truths, of redemption. And somewhere in the Catskill Mountains, in a sanctuary where blue butterflies danced in the moonlight, an elderly woman watched the stars, finally at peace with the past she had helped shape. The circle was complete. The curse broken. The story ready to continue, not as an echo of the past but as a promise of the future. 3 months later, Helen paused before the new sign at the entrance of the old Montgomery Tech building, now renamed the Bellini Costa Foundation for Innovation and Social Justice. The autumn sun reflected on the polished metal, highlighting the words engraved below the name, "Honoring the past, rebuilding the future." "Does it look good?" Daniel's voice sounded behind her, followed by the warmth of his arms wrapping around her waist. Helen leaned back against him, allowing herself the luxury of this moment of public intimacy. something she was still learning to accept after years of self-imposed isolation. "It's perfect," she replied. The last 3 months had been a roller coaster of emotions and changes. Daniel's public confession about Richard Montgomery's crimes had exploded like a bomb in the media, generating headlines across the country. Documents from the National Archives, carefully compiled by Helen, corroborated the story of the company's collaboration with the military dictatorship, of illegally appropriated lands, of silenced political opponents. As expected, there was fierce resistance from the board of directors, threats of lawsuits and plunging company shares. But there was also surprising support from progressive sectors, human rights organizations, and families of political dissidents who finally saw a powerful figure acknowledging guilt previously denied. The transformation of Montgomery Tech into a non-profit foundation dedicated to historical reparations and the development of socially responsible technologies was the final stage of the plan. Daniel had given up much of his personal fortune, keeping only enough to live comfortably. "Eliza would be proud," he commented, his chin resting on top of Helen's head. The mention of Eliza brought a bittersweet pang. The elderly woman had passed, so way peacefully in her sleep, just a week after their meeting at the sanctuary, as if she had waited just long enough to see the conclusion of the story she had helped shape. She had left a letter for Helen detailing the complete history of the Bellinis and the Montgomerys, along with legal documents naming her the heir to the Blue Butterfly Sanctuary. "She knew she didn't have much time," Helen said softly. "She waited for us all those years, kept herself alive by the promise she made to Sophia." Daniel nodded. The movement felt against her hair. "And she kept the cure safe. The doctor said today that there are no longer any traces of the substance in my DNA. I am completely cured." Helen turned in his arms, studying his face. The tremors had completely disappeared after the 3rd dose of the antidote, and with them the shadow of constant worry that had once inhabited his eyes. Daniel seemed younger now, lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "How does it feel to be a free man?" she asked, tracing the line of his jaw with soft fingers. "Not just free from the poison," he replied, capturing her hand and kissing her palm. "Free from the lie, from the toxic legacy, free to be just Daniel." His eyes met hers, although technically I should be Daniel Costa, not Montgomery. "Daniel Costa Bellini," Helen corrected with a smile. "If we're going to respect all lineages—" His smile widened. "I like the sound of that, although Helen Costa Bellini sounds even better." The words hung between them, not exactly a proposal, but something close to it. In the 3 months since the sanctuary, their relationship had evolved with surprising naturalness. Helen had moved into Daniel's apartment on the Upper East Side, more spacious than her small place in Brooklyn Heights and closer to the Foundation's new office where they both now worked. "Don't you think we're going too fast?" she teased, though her heart raced at the implication. "Fast?" Daniel laughed, the sound low and comforting. "Helen, we both waited for this before we were even born. Our shared dreams, the diary, the music. As Eliza said, some stories demand to be told, no matter how long it takes." Helen felt the familiar warmth grow in her chest, that mixture of belonging, desire, and something deeper that she was still learning to name without fear. "Lover," she said softly. "Testing the word. That's what it's about in the end, isn't it? Not revenge, not justice, not redemption. Just love persisting through time." Daniel pulled her closer. "Sophia and Maurice. You and I. Circles closing, stories continuing." He kissed her forehead. "And about the name, does Costa Bellini please you?" Helen smiled against his chest. "Perhaps, although I need a slightly more elaborate proposal than a casual suggestion on the sidewalk." Daniel pulled back slightly, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Oh, and what would the archivist Helen Bellini Silva consider an adequate proposal? Something involving historical documents, perhaps. Ancient manuscripts. Mysterious keys? Surprise me," she challenged, feeling lighter and freer than she had ever imagined possible. "We have time now. All the time in the world." He intertwined his fingers with hers,